Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 337 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. I just made it back home from an outstanding cow moose hunt in Colorado with my son, James. This hunt wasn't quite as big of an adventure as James's and my mule deer hunt in New Mexico last year, but we still had an amazing trip hunting Shiras Moose in the lower 48, which is a species I wasn't sure I would ever get to hunt because those tags are just so darn hard to obtain. So today's episode is a detailed recap of this moose hunt, evaluations of some of the gear we used, and some lessons we learned along the way. Before we get started, I would like to extend an invitation to you to join the community I am building on Patreon at patreon.com/biggamehunter, or at the link in the show notes. I literally just hosted a live question and answer session with my Patreon supporters a couple weeks ago, and I'll also be doing more of those going forward. I'll also be doing some things like share results of ballistic gel test and ammo comparisons with my Patreon supporters too. I also prioritize correspondence with my supporters on Patreon above anyone else because I just receive so many darned questions these days. And also, as you'll learn here shortly, I managed to film my shots on this hunt, on this moose, through my scope. And I also did a detailed necropsy on this moose afterwards, where I show how the bullets performed and all of those things. I am only sharing that video and those necropsy results with my Patreon supporters. I'm not going to share that with the general public. I also have some other cool bonuses for Patreon supporters too. Sign up at the link in the show notes and you'll get access to all of that stuff. So let's get started talking about this moose hunt, and we'll go all the way back to the beginning. Longtime podcast listeners will realize that I have been on the trail of moose for several years now. I've mentioned in the past that I wanted to take a mule deer, a coos deer, a javelina, a pronghorn, and an elk during the 4 years I lived in El Paso. I did indeed accomplish that goal, and once I did, I came up with some new hunting goals I shared with you a couple of years ago. One of those goals was to take bigger specimens of those previously listed animals, and I'm in the process of working on that one. My other goal was to take a moose. Now, I went to Canada in pursuit of moose in November of 2021. I had a fun trip up there, but I ultimately came home empty-handed, and things just didn't quite work out. But I did not give up on the dream, and I have continued to pursue that goal of getting a moose. That is easier said than done, though. For an American like me, I have basically four options. I can either draw an extremely difficult to obtain Shiras Moose tag in one of the western states like Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, Montana, or Washington. I could draw a Canada moose tag in one of the eastern states like Maine or New Hampshire. I could go on a guided hunt in Canada, or I could go up to Alaska for Alaska Yukon moose. But that's the problem. Those hunts in Canada, and especially Alaska, can be pretty darn pricey, and the ones in the continental USA are dependent on obtaining a tag that can be nearly as difficult to obtain as a sheep or a mountain goat tag. Not quite that difficult to obtain, depending on the details, but still a lot harder to get than a normal antelope, deer, or elk tag. Nothing is guaranteed either, and though success rates can be pretty high in some places, getting the tag and or going to Alaska or going to Canada just get you in the door for the ability to hunt. You could very well shell out a bunch of cash for a hunt and not get a moose. After all, I already paid for a moose hunt in Canada and I came home empty-handed. Now, since that hunt in 2021, I have mainly pursued moose in the draw, and I applied in 2022 and 2023 without success. I tried something different this year, though. Instead of applying for a bull moose tag, like I had in the past, I applied for a cow moose tag where I could. Not every state allocates cow moose tags to hunters, and not all of those states that do that will let non-residents apply for a cow moose tag. And so I put in for cow where I could, bull moose everywhere else. I would not say that it is easy to draw a cow moose tag, but doing so can be less difficult than getting a bull moose tag. Now, to my great surprise, I learned I pulled a cow moose tag in Colorado when their draw results came out in early June. At first, I was super excited. But like I said earlier, getting the tag is just the first part of the process, and after that, reality set in, and I started thinking to myself, how the heck am I going to do this? My plan always was to get the tag first and then figure out the logistics. Now I had the tag, and I needed to figure out things in a hurry. Because like I said, Colorado releases their draw results in early June, and this hunt, the moose season in Colorado for the rifle season takes place in October, and the archery and muzzleloader actually even begin before that. So there's only a couple months between the draw results coming out and crunch time on the ground for the actual hunt. So I hit pause on everything, and I started sorting out logistics. I wanted to make the most out of this opportunity and not do another moose hunt where I would potentially come home empty-handed. Now, I get it. Still, nothing is guaranteed, but I really wanted to do everything I can to set myself up for success from the beginning. So my first plan was to try it do-it-yourself, like I usually do my hunts. Success rates are pretty high on these moose hunts, both cow and bull, and moose are also one of those animals where hunters who previously drew the tag will often happily share tips with other people. After all, they're not going to do that hunt for themselves ever again. But the idea of finding, killing, and especially recovering a moose, even a cow moose, got more and more intimidating the more I thought about it. Now, the fact that they love such low-lying, wet, and marshy areas further complicates things. Getting a bull elk off the side of a mountain is a lot of work, but it is doable for a lone hunter. And it just gets less and less difficult the more people you have to help you. Now, you take that same animal, make it a little bigger, and yes, even a cow moose is bigger than the average mature bull elk, and you plop it down in a wet, muddy willow thicket, and things just get a lot more difficult. It's still possible to do, and people do it all the time. It's just harder. So the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I need some assistance with this process. This tag is not easy to get. I want to make the most of it. So I ended up booking with an outfitter for this hunt, and looking back on things, boy, am I glad I did. I mainly wanted help recovering a moose, but going with an outfitter also simplifies logistics. You book a fully outfitted hunt like this where lodging and food and everything is included, like was the case for this hunt. You no longer need to worry about going grocery shopping, for instance, or finding a place to stay. It eliminates the need to drive up with camping supplies or to find an Airbnb or a VRBO to stay in. Plus, you get help with scouting and, of course, the expertise of a guide who has actually hunted moose before, who knows where moose live, how they behave, the best ways to hunt them in these areas, all of that stuff. So I got that sorted, and we'll talk more about the outfitter here later. And then after I decided I was going to go that route, got things locked in with that, I started preparing my gear. Now, in general, my gear list does not change that much for most of my Western hunts. I have the same clothes, same boots that I wear, same backpack, all of that stuff. It just kind of changes around the edges. In this case, I got a new rifle for the hunt. Now, I mentioned attending the Bergara Academy in Wyoming in episode 327. That happened this past summer. While I was there, I shot the new left-handed Bergara Wilderness Sierra. I actually used that rifle in 6.5 Creedmoor in Wyoming. They had a left-handed model of that rifle for me while I was up there. But they also make that rifle in 7mm PRC. And they also not only make it in 7PRC, but they have a left-handed version of that rifle in 7PRC too. Now, some podcast listeners have accused me of having a love affair with the 7mm PRC. They are possibly exaggerating, but I definitely really like that cartridge. I have hunted with the 7PRC a lot since it came out in 2023. I took it to Africa. I shot my mule deer last year with it, and I've taken it on a couple of exotic hunts here in Texas that I actually haven't even talked about on the podcast yet this year. It's been so darn busy. I actually have a personal goal of hunting with and taking an animal with every single factory load for the cartridge. So I felt like this would obviously be another opportunity to do just that. And plus, I also just really like that Bergara Sierra that I shot up in Wyoming. So I got in touch with the guys at Bergara. They sent me one in 7 PRC to take on this hunt. So like I said, it was a left-handed Sierra, 7 PRC. I put a Leupold VX6 HD 3 to 18 by 44 millimeter scope with an illuminated reticle. I also equipped this rifle with the ultimate firearm sling that I've been using for the past year. And I also put a trigger camera on this scope. And we'll talk more about the trigger camera here in a second. The Bergara Sierra comes from the factory with a removable muzzle brake, and it's also threaded. So I just took the muzzle brake off, slapped my Banish backcountry suppressor on it. Now, I've been using a Spartan Precision Ascent tripod for about the last year or so. I use it for glassing. I also use it for shooting. I used it in New Mexico last year, and I've also since then used it on a couple of other hunts with some success too. So I decided to bring it on this hunt. I practiced with it at the range, brought it with me to Colorado. Now, I received this new Sierra rifle about 2 weeks prior to the hunt, so I haven't talked about it too much, and I didn't get a lot of time with it before I went on the hunt. Now, like I mentioned, I wanted to take animals with all of the different factory loads for the 7 PRC. I used the Hornady Outfitter for most of my hunts in 2023. I've used the Hornady Precision Hunter ammo on an exotic hunt here in Texas this year. I've also used the new Nosler Trophy Grade long-range ammo on another exotic hunt. I'll tell you more about those in a future episode, but I've used all of those, and they've all worked really well for me. So I was looking at using either the new Barnes load for the 7 PRC or the Federal Terminal Ascent load. I basically said I'm going to use whatever shoots best in this rifle. I shot them both. They both shot well, but the Federal ammo shot a little bit better. So I'm going to save the Barnes ammo for a future hunt, and I decided to take the Federal Terminal Ascent ammo, 170 grain Terminal Ascent ammo on this trip. I've also shot the Hornady match ammo just to help me get a feel for the rifle and help me get the scope dialed in initially so I didn't have to shoot a bunch of my Terminal Ascent ammo to do that. The match ammo shot great, and really nothing shot bad. The Terminal Ascent ammo did shoot the best, though, and I've been very impressed with it. I've shot a sub-MOA 10-shot group with that, too, and that's how it performed right out of the box. No real long, convoluted barrel break-in process or anything. I did some basic cleaning with it as soon as I got it, and then when I was switching back and forth between the copper Barnes ammo and the Terminal Ascent ammo, I did thoroughly clean the bore just so I wasn't having any issues like some people have sometimes going from lead core to a copper bullet and vice versa. But that's really all I did with it. And all in all, everything in it shot really well. The Federal Terminal Ascent ammo was also delivering velocities very close to advertised too. The rifle has a 22-inch long barrel, advertised velocity of 2,950 feet per second for the Terminal Ascent ammo. I have a Garmin verified velocity of 2,940 feet per second with that ammo out of this rifle with my Banish backcountry suppressor attached. So I was real happy with that. Now, there is more Sierra content coming soon. I'm not going to talk too much more about the rifle in detail in this episode, but I'll just say that during my prep for this hunt, once I got the rifle sighted in and selected the ammo I was going to use, I took it out to a couple of the shooting ranges close to my houses and really kind of wrung it out as far as I could. I did a lot of shooting at 100 to 200 yards, but I also stretched out the range a little bit. One shooting range I visit pretty frequently has steel plates at 200, 300, 400, and 500 yards. As I wrapped up my range session there, I was just hammering a feral hog-shaped steel plate at 500 yards. A couple days later, I went to another range that only goes out to 300 yards, but this range has smaller steel plates at it and has a bunch of 2 and 3 MOA targets out at 300 yards. And I just went down the line just nailing each of those steel plates with each shot. That felt great. I felt like my dope was validated, that the rifle would shoot that ammo accurately out to as far as I was reasonably going to be shooting a moose. I felt ready for the hunt. Now, I mentioned earlier that I booked with an outfitter. I booked with Red Feather Guides and Outfitters in Colorado. They offer moose hunts in the unit that I drew in. These are fully guided and outfitted hunts. You stay in a heated cabin. You eat home-cooked food in a small lodge. You get your own guide, transportation during the hunt. It's a mix of different modes of transport depending on exactly where you're running into moose and whatnot. But for the most part, I was just riding in a truck. We'd go out and park and then walk. Not too dissimilar from how I do a lot of my hunting anyway. So they seemed like a nice place to go for moose in general, and also a place to take my son. And so, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, James joined me on this hunt again, and he is 8 now. Now, the guys at Red Feather book their bull moose hunters first, and they hit the woods as soon as the season starts. Then they bring in their cow hunters once they wrap up those bull moose hunts a couple days later. As it turned out, all of their bull moose hunters actually tagged out very quickly, and they called me to see if I wanted to come up for my hunt a few days earlier than planned. Now, I could not come due to an inflexible schedule on my end, but I was still excited to get that news that things were going so well, and I was excited to start the hunt. So I went up as planned. I flew into Denver on Saturday. The flight was great. Got my bags, got my rifle, went to the rental car place to get my rental car, and that's where things kind of went off the rails. As it turned out, I had to wait 2 hours and 45 minutes to actually get my car, and I had a longer wait there for my car than my flight from Houston to Denver. And even as I sit here over a week later, I'm still pretty aggravated at budget rental car. But in any case, I was concerned about an inauspicious start to the hunt, but fortunately that was the low point of the trip. I did finally get a car, and I did drive out to where I was hunting, and I made it there that evening, just a couple hours later than I originally planned. I had dinner that evening in the lodge with the people from Red Feather and one very happy, successful bull moose hunter who was about to leave the next day. Went to bed that night, got up early the next morning, had breakfast, shot my rifle, confirmed 0. Then we headed out and went hunting. Now, unfortunately, the weather was unseasonably warm. I actually talked to Mark Floyd during my hunt. He was on an elk hunt in Wyoming while I was in Colorado on this moose hunt. It was also very warm up there, and it also just tamped down on the game activity. All the animals were still there. They were still doing their thing. They were just less active during the day because of the warm temperatures. It actually sounds like he had even warmer temperatures that were even worse for elk activity in Wyoming on his hunt than was the case for me on my hunt. So like I said, it was warm, but not as warm. It was getting down into maybe around in the 20 degrees Fahrenheit range in the morning, get up into the high 60s in the afternoon. So for humans, it was very pleasant during the afternoon, not bad at all. A little chilly in the morning, but not bad. But it was just a little too warm for the elk and the moose to really be active during the day. But in any case, can't control the weather, so we went hunting and we're doing our thing as planned, and the idea was to see how things go and we'll adapt as necessary. So we headed out that first morning with Ty, who is the actual owner of the outfitter, and Doug, who was assisting as a guide, James and me. We drove a little ways, parked, and then walked into some public land that we could hunt on. And this particular area has a good reputation for a lot of moose activity. And they had been doing a lot of scouting in the previous days prior to my arrival, and while they hadn't seen anything that was super duper hot, they'd found some promising spots, and this is one of them that we went to that morning. Parked the truck, got our stuff out, started walking, and we walked maybe a half mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile down this old logging road that was closed to motorized traffic. And as we approached this meadow, Ty signaled us to be quiet, and we kind of crept up to the edge of it, and he just poked his head out into the clearing and looked around, and he came back and looked at me and says, "Hey, there's a moose right there." And I actually did not initially believe him. We're 20 minutes into our hunt this morning, and I thought he was joking with me. And he says, No, I'm serious. There's a cow moose with a calf right there. Now, he and I had initially talked about this prior to the hunt. Now, I keep saying that I had a cow moose tag. Technically, I had an antlerless moose tag. The Colorado regulations define that as a female with no antlers. Antlerless also means a young male with antlers less than 5 inches long. So technically, I think I could have shot a calf, though I did not want to. There's also no restrictions on shooting a cow moose with a calf in tow. You can do that if you want to. So my idea going into this hunt was I wanted to shoot a mature cow moose that ideally did not have a calf with it. But Ty and I did talk about that prior to the hunt, and he said that's fine if that's what you want to do. But the calves are old enough this time of year that they'll probably survive even if the mother gets killed. But he says it's up to you, no problem. We can try and find you a cow without a calf if necessary. But it's just harder sometimes. So in light of that conversation and the fact that the weather was just warmer than usual, and I was expecting this to be a little bit more difficult of a hunt than would have been the case if it would have been significantly cooler, I decided, okay, let's see what we can make happen with this cow moose, even though she has a calf with her. I don't want to, quote unquote, look a gift horse in the mouth right at the beginning of the hunt like this. I felt like I would really be kicking myself if I passed on this cow moose and then didn't end up getting another shot at a cow moose the rest of the time I was out there and went home empty-handed. So we put a stalk on that moose. I had my Spartan Ascent tripod strapped to the side of my backpack. I signaled the Ty. He got it off, extended the legs, got ready, and he says, okay, get everything ready in your mind, start going through your shot sequence. We're just going to edge out of the woods here just enough where you can see the moose. I'm going to set the tripod down. You kneel down and you shoot. They're only 80, 90 yards away, and take a shot. So we did that, and this is the first time. I haven't seen the moose yet, remember. So he has, I have not, but he's pointing to where they are. Sets the tripod out. I slide out, get set up on it, and I see the calf and the rear end of the cow disappearing into the woods. They weren't really scared or agitated, but they knew something was up, and they just kind of eased out of there into the dark timber. We tried to follow them a little bit, but when we didn't get a shot within a minute or so of doing that, Ty pulled us back and says, hey, these moose are just going to go bed down into the woods here. And if we don't mess with them, they're going to stay here, and we'll probably see them in this meadow this evening. So we decided that we were going to put those moose on ice, back out of there, try another spot in that same general area where they'd seen moose in the past, see what we can make happen there. And if that didn't work out, we come back to that meadow that evening. So that's what we did. Headed back to the truck, drove a few miles down the road, went into another spot, started walking up a closed logging road there like we just previously had. And within a few hundred yards, maybe a half mile, we started seeing a lot of bird activity, magpies, crows, vultures. And it started giving us the idea that there was a dead animal in there. And sure enough, we went up a little bit farther on the road, saw something all on the other end of a meadow bordering the road, walked in, and it was a dead moose there. Someone looked like they had killed what we were pretty certain was a cow moose either 1 or 2 days prior. And they had done a good job of butchering the moose and getting all the edible meat out of there, but those birds were still picking up all the scraps and everything. And we're like, oh, okay, well, clearly this was a good spot for a moose, but it's not here anymore. Let's back out of this drainage, go check out another one. Went and did that. We found an area that looked, quote unquote, moosey. A lot of potential for moose. There was moose sign in there, but we didn't actually see one. Starting to get later in the day, getting into the afternoon at this point. We put in, probably about a good 6-7 miles already doing this. And James was starting to get tired. And I was getting kind of tired too. And I was like, hey, this has been a busy first day. Let's back out of here. Go back and we'll rest, get something to eat. And let's go sit back on that meadow where we saw the moose this morning like we thought. And Ty and Doug thought that was a good idea. So that's what we did. Took a little break, got some food, headed back to that meadow that evening and a couple hours before dark. And we sat on the edge of the meadow, didn't see anything, and it started getting dark. And when we had maybe 45 minutes of shooting light left, Ty, James, and I stood up and we started walking down the edge of this meadow. And this was a pretty long, skinny meadow that was maybe 200 yards wide and maybe 3/4 of a mile long. But you couldn't see the entire thing in one go. There was a slight rise in the middle of it with some trees on it, and then the meadow kind of wrapped around the other side of that small hill. So we're thinking, okay, maybe the moose are in the vicinity, but not here. So we started walking down, and still not seeing them. Walked all the way to the very end, didn't see him. Turned around, started coming back, and as we rounded a bend back in that meadow, we saw those moose, and saw two black dots right there, and they're maybe 350, 400 yards away at this point. So we pick up the pace a little bit, get behind some bushes and trees to screen our movements, and started moving towards where those moose were because the wind was good. There was no indication that they knew we were there. And we got to about 220-ish yards, 220, 230 yards from where the moose were. Got set up once again on my tripod, dropped my backpack, and took aim at these moose. And I could see the cow and the calf there, and they either heard or saw something, and they were looking at us. They weren't real agitated again, but they were looking at us. And so we were kind of pinned down there. I'm looking through my scope at these moose, ready to go, just waiting for a shot opportunity. Ty and I had also discussed prior to the hunt that he prefers his hunters to take shots that are close to broadside. A little bit quartering either direction is fine, but he doesn't like real strongly quartering to or away shots, and he does not like frontal shots on a moose. He says, it's fine when it works out well, but it's just harder for people to place their shots appropriately with those sort of shot angles. So this moose is facing straight on to us at this point, and the calf is right in front of her. So I don't have the shot that he wants, and I also don't have a safe shot. But it's getting dark at this point. We have several minutes of shooting light left. And so we just sat there hoping they would move a little bit and I'd get a clean shot. I felt very stable, very comfortable. All I needed was for them to move just a little bit and give me the shot I needed, and then I could take it. And it was getting darker and darker and darker, and those moose just did not cooperate with us. That calf just kept circling the cow and staying real tight to her, never really giving me a safe window. And the cow turned a little bit, but it was still just a little bit too steep of an angle for us to really feel comfortable with it. Now, by this point, we're almost out of legal shooting light, and the cow and the calf moved off a little bit behind some brush. And so we tried to close the distance on them, try to get a shot in with just that little bit of light that we had left, and it just didn't work out. They never presented a clear view where we could see them, and then it got dark, and so we left. But still not bad. We'd had two close encounters with moose that day, and it's also day one. So no problem at all. We're all feeling really good about this. Go back, get some dinner, go to bed, wake up early the next morning. We come back to that same meadow, sit on the edges of it again in hopes that cow and that calf are going to come back out and we'll get a better shot at them. Sat there all morning, walked down and back a little bit, did not see anything, did not see any indications that the cow and the calf were still there. And Ty was afraid that, especially bumping them that second time, those moose were like, the heck with this place, and they'd moved on to some other place. So we did some more walking, made a big loop in there, and it looked really good, but just weren't seeing any other sign indicating that there were any other moose in that immediate vicinity. So we pulled out of there, and I started talking with Ty and Doug about other options of what we could do, because we put on a good number of miles already, and James was getting kind of tired, and I didn't want to push him too hard. I wanted this to be fun for him, but I also wanted to get a moose. And so I was expressing those concerns to Ty, and he was like, okay, we do have another option here. There is a spot that's not too hard to get into that is really good moose habitat. You can sit there, you can glass this afternoon, and there's always moose in there, and we'll see what we can do. So that's what we did. So Doug, James, and I went to glass that willow flat, and then Ty went out separately from us to do some scouting and see what he could turn up. So that afternoon, Doug and I saw a pretty good size, and maybe a medium-sized bull in that willow thicket, which was great. And it looked like it was a really good spot. So even though we only saw one moose and it was a bull that I could not shoot, it looked like it was good habitat. That was a promising place to continue to hunt. Lots of water, lots of willows, lots of places to hide. Also looked like it was a good travel corridor for the moose. And it was pretty thick in there. And I'll talk a little bit more about this spot later. But it's very likely that even though we only saw that one moose, that there were other moose in there as well that we just didn't see. Now, meanwhile, other guides were out scouting. Ty was separate from us, looking at a different spot. A couple of his other guides were out there seeing what they could find in some of the other areas that they had seen moose in the past, casting their net wide, so to speak. Now, Ty found another promising spot that he thought looked really moosey that was worth hunting. So he asked me what I wanted to do that night. You want to check out this new spot that I found, or you want to go back to where you were today where you saw that bull moose? I did not want to leave moose to find a moose. And at this time, another cow moose hunter arrived. So I was the only hunter at all that first day that I was there. All the bull moose hunters had wrapped up their hunts and they were gone. It was just me that first day. Then a second cow hunter arrived that evening, and he was going to hunt the next day. So Ty gave me the choice, since I'd been there first and I'd already used up part of my hunt. I could either stay where we hunted that afternoon, or I could take the other spot that Ty had found that day. I opted to stay and continue to hunt that willow bottom. And then Ty took the new guy out to this other spot that he had checked out that he thought looked promising. Got out there early before daylight, got set up, glassing into the willow bottom that day, and things actually kind of kicked off pretty early that morning. Doug, after just a couple minutes out there after shooting light, Doug elbowed me and says, "Look behind us." And there was a cow moose running behind us. And instead of moving through that willow bottom where we were looking, she had climbed out of it, crossed our path behind us, and actually caught our scent. We were hunting with a good wind where it was blowing from the willow bottom to us, but since she got behind us, she caught our scent unexpectedly like that, and that really agitated her. She took off running behind us, and there was just never a safe or a reasonable shot that we could have taken. She was moving too fast. She kept going, and then she jumped a fence onto some private land that we could see into, but we could not hunt on. And she kind of stood there for a couple minutes on the other side of the fence, and then in an agitated manner moved off, and that was it with her. So that was annoying, but what are you going to do about that? Sometimes weird things happen out there sometimes. Later that morning, we saw a really nice bull and a small to medium bull within, say, the first 2 hours we were out there. So just that one cow that we could have legally shot, but not practically shot that day, and then a couple of bull moose I didn't have a tag to shoot. So a little frustrating, but all in all, still a pretty good morning. Saw a good number of moose. Clearly, a lot of activity going on here. And even though I didn't get to shoot that cow that morning, I thought, okay, I made a good decision coming back to the spot. Let's keep hammering things out here, and our luck is going to change. That afternoon, we saw 5 more moose in that same spot. We saw a big bull, and I think it was probably that same big bull that we saw that morning. We saw a medium-sized bull, 2 little bulls, and a cow. And I don't know if it was the same cow from that morning or another one. I didn't really get a good look at that cow that afternoon. So we were sitting up on a little bit of a rise. And actually, probably more appropriate to say we were sitting on kind of the normal ground level there, and then the ground sloped down from us into this big willow bottom. So we were higher than the willow bottom, but not that much higher. This area was very, very thick with brush and willows. There were a few open clearings in there, and especially after we were hunting out there for a day or so and kind of figured out what was going on, what we would see a moose appear in one of these clearings, move through it, disappear into the bush on one side, and then appear in the next clearing a few minutes later. And it looked like these moose were using this area as a travel corridor and were traveling almost on the same paths through this area. And they would predictably appear in each clearing and in each spot where we had good visibility in sequence. And so even though we had a pretty wide field of view into this area, there was just little snippets where we could actually see the animals moving through there. For instance, that nice bull appeared almost out of nowhere in that biggest clearing directly in front of us. He appeared on the left side of it, pretty quickly moved through that clearing, disappeared into the brush on the right side. And if you weren't paying attention, you might have even missed him going through there. So you had to be really looking into these clearings because they weren't there for very long, just maybe 30 seconds to a minute before they would disappear from one side into the other. And if you were looking in the wrong direction, it could move through and it would be there and you just wouldn't know it. But in any case, he moved through this clearing pretty quickly, disappeared into the brush, popped out at this other spot. A few minutes later, we watched him move through a gap, maybe 30, 40 yards wide, disappeared, popped out again a couple hundred yards later. Then we watched him disappear into the brush, and then he appeared on the other side of the fence in another gap, maybe 30 minutes later. So we got to look at this bull a lot. And like I said, he was a pretty nice bull. He was great on one side, and it looked like he was broken off on the other side. So he jumped that fence, stopped in that gap, and then turned and looked back. And I pulled out my really big camera. This camera actually has a ridiculous zoom lens on it. Adam Weiss actually recommended it to me, and this is what he uses for filming his targets at long range at the shooting range. He'll set it up on a tripod, zoom in on his target, and he can see his impacts very clearly on it. And so he can, like I said, he can not only see it, but he can video it at the same time and make his videos doing that. Well, it worked out pretty well on this hunt. I was taking some pictures, I was taking some video with it, and with it zoomed way in like that, I could see even better with the camera than I could with my binoculars. And as I was looking at this moose and just trying to get, photos and videos of him, I could see something moving behind him in the bush on the other side of the fence. And as I looked at it some more, I could see, oh my gosh, that's a head moving around and it's eating some of those willows behind him. Turned out to be a cow moose over there. So that was really cool. I got a couple minutes of video of this big, nice bull moose standing there looking at us with that cow behind him. But like I said, they were on the other side of the fence. That was private property that we could retrieve a wounded moose on after calling the owner and getting permission. But but Ty had a good relationship with that guy, and he said there was no issues going over there if we needed to. But we could not shoot something that was already over there. It had to be on the correct side of the fence. Now, Doug called that bull moose, a couple of times, hoping to kind of incentivize him to come back towards us. And he would look at us whenever Doug would call, but he was not interested in moving and heading back that direction. And the cow did not even seem to care. If she even noticed those calls, she gave no indication that she did. She just kept right on chowing down on those willows the entire time. We watched this go on for a good 5 to 10 minutes, and eventually a smaller bull joined that big bull and the cow, and I could actually see all three moose all at the same time for a minute or so. Then the big bull moved off. Then we eventually got a clear view of the cow for a second, but she didn't stop. And like I said, she was also still on the wrong side of the fence too. Then the small bull and the cow both disappeared into the brush in the same direction that the big bull moose did. So that turned out to be a pretty busy day, a total of 8 moose sightings that day. Now, it's possible we were seeing the same moose more than once, but still a darn good day. Now, the next day was the last day of the hunt, though. So we're coming down to crunch time. The other guides continued to scout elsewhere, and one of them actually found another spot that they thought was also a pretty good possibility. We were offered the opportunity to hunt there. He saw a moose, but he just wasn't sure if it was a bull or a cow. So I was faced with that dilemma. Do I try out this new spot, or do I go back to where we had been hunting? I did opt to go back where we had been hunting the previous day and where we had seen all of those moose. It was really hard for me to walk away from a spot like that where I'd seen moose every time we hunted, even if most of them were bulls and things just hadn't quite worked out with the cows yet. But I felt certain that that area was just good enough moose habitat with enough moose moving around in there that if we continued to hunt it hard enough, we had pretty good odds of a cow turning up. So went back to the same spot, got set up to start glassing, and we saw a medium-sized bull right after first light. And it's kind of a weird feeling to see something moving, pull up the binoculars and be like, it's got antlers. I don't care about that. Usually it's the other way around when I'm deer or elk or antelope hunting or something. But so we saw something move, pull up the binoculars. It's got antlers. Disappeared into the bush anyway. I could have shot that moose a little bit later that morning as he moved from one clearing into the other one. Just for grins and for a little bit of practice, I got my rifle set up on the next clearing I thought he would pop out at, and as it turned out, a couple minutes later, he did, just like I thought, and he did actually stop in a spot where I could have shot him if I would have had a bull moose tag. But I didn't. Still not a bad way to start the day. Now, a few minutes later, we saw a cow on the other side of that fence I keep talking about. She was pretty close to the fence, though, and seemed to be slowly heading our direction. She didn't look like she knew we were there. The wind was good that morning. It looked like she was meandering through that willow thicket, having a little bit of breakfast on the way to wherever she was going that morning. But she was heading the right direction. Almost all of the moose we had seen in that area over the past few days had appeared in the 150 to 200 yard range. It depends on exactly which clearing they appeared in, though. That bull moose I saw that morning was at 250 yards for the first sighting, then 290 yards for the second before he disappeared. And the way everything had worked out was there was a little bit more open area kind of close to us, sort of at the base of this little rise that we were on. And when I say open, I don't mean like open. I mean just like less thick. There were still lots of willows down there, but they just weren't as tall as the trees and bushes were a little bit farther away from us. And it seemed like to that point, everything we'd seen, except for that cow that came out behind us, was far enough out there that they were behind the taller stuff, which was why it was more difficult to see them and why there were only a certain number of gaps that we could feasibly shoot a moose in out there. So since we saw this moose on the other side of the fence moving towards us, I was thinking she's going to follow the same path that most of these other moose we have seen moving through there are going to, just do it in reverse. So hopefully in a couple minutes, she's going to jump that fence, head in that direction, and then she's going to appear in this gap over here, and I'll be able to take a shot on her. So I got my rifle set up on that first gap that I thought she would appear in if she kept going the way that she was going. And that gap was about 200 yards away from us, and it was perfect. That was the range my rifle was zeroed at. So I got my rifle set up there. Then I turned my head to the right to look at that cow, continue to track her progress, saw where she was, looked back out in front of me, and to my shock, there was another cow moose standing right there in front of us. Apparently, she had been bedded in those willows the entire time and then had chosen that moment to stand up. And she was almost directly in front of us, about 130 yards away. She saw me move, though, and she pegged me. It looked like she wasn't quite sure what was going on, but she kept staring at us. Now, moose don't have great eyesight, but it looked like she knew something was up. The wind was fortunately good, so she was curious, but not really scared. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I had an antlerless moose tag, and I did not want to shoot an immature bull with small antlers. I wanted to make 100% certain that this was a cow moose before shooting. So Doug examined her closely with his binoculars, and while he was doing that, I very slowly moved my tripod into position, and I got ready to shoot. It was pretty close to where I needed to be aiming to shoot her, but not exactly there. So I just kind of grabbed it, slid it over, turned on my camera, got ready to shoot, and Doug confirmed, okay, this is a cow moose, go ahead and shoot, and he did that right as I was about ready. Now, fortunately, the Ascent tripod is a pretty cool device, and you can just plop your rifle down on it, tighten up the tension on it, and have the rifle just there ready to go. And that definitely made this process faster and required less movement. Just need to adjust it and fine-tune it, take aim, and there you go. But it's not like I had to pick my rifle up off the ground, slap it on the tripod, or anything like that. All right, so I mentioned earlier I had a Trigger Cam 2.1 camera on this rifle, and that's a pretty cool device. You just mount it to the rear of your scope, turn it on, and then using mirrors, it can look through your scope and record it. And so it takes a video of literally exactly what you are seeing through your scope. So I turned that on, got it rolling, took the safety off, and then took aim. This cow was quartering towards us a little bit. It was closer to broadside, but a little bit favoring quartering towards. I would not say it was a quote-unquote steeply quartering to shot, slightly quartering to. I could not see the entire moose due to the willows, but I could clearly see about the front half of her, to include her front shoulder, and that's really what I needed to see. And like I said, she was about 130 yards away from me. So I aimed, took the safety off, squeezed the trigger, and that bullet hit with a very distinctive slap. I chambered another round as she turned and ran almost directly away from me. And she ran a few steps away and then turned again. And so at this point, her right shoulder is still facing me. I shot her in the right shoulder with the first shot. The right shoulder is still facing me the way she turned, but instead of quartering to, she's quartering away from me a little bit. Now, this time she stopped with about the front half of her body obscured by another willow. She was clearly unsteady on her feet already, but I wanted to get her down as quickly as possible. So I put the crosshairs where I thought her shoulder would be, and I fired again straight through that tree. That second bullet also hit with a very distinctive slap. Now, like I mentioned, I got this whole thing on video. Going back and reviewing the footage, I fired my first shot at the 22-second mark and my second shot at the 27-second mark. So 5 seconds between shots. After that second shot, I chambered another round, and I was preparing to shoot again, but I could see her really unsteady, and she started to rear backwards and fall down. And she got up after a few seconds, but was even more unsteady on her feet at this point, and she fell back down within another second or two. It was a pretty cold morning. Like I said, it was down into the 20s, and I shot her, I think it was about 7:40 in the morning. So it's still pretty cold, below freezing at this point, and actually in the video you can see steam coming out of both sides of her chest from my bullet entry and exit wounds, like I said, as she fell down that last time. So I thought that due to where I was aiming, that I hit her in the lungs, and seeing that steam come out like that seemed to be a pretty good indication that I hit where I thought I was hitting. Now, she fell down for the last time just over 20 seconds after my first shot. She did not go down instantly, but she was not on her feet long after I started shooting. Now, I could see the bushes kind of thrashing for a few seconds, but she did not regain her feet again after she fell down that second time. And she went maybe 5 to 10 yards after my first shot. And she almost did not leave my initial scope view. And like I said, about 130, 135 yards for the first shot, a little bit farther, but not much farther for the second shot. So I stayed on her in the scope, and then the bushes eventually stopped moving, and that was that. And I was thrilled at this point. We'd hunted hard for several days, a couple days sitting there glassing, a couple days pretty significant walking, especially for little James. But at this point, we finally got this moose down on the last morning that I could hunt. And now the work begins. Now, Doug went back to camp, and camp was not very far away, and he got help there. I stayed with James to watch the area and make sure that she was indeed down for good. Doug came back a little while later with one of the other guides in a truck, and they could actually drive up to right where we were glassing. So they drove up to there, we all got our stuff, and then descended down into that mess of willows. And this was a mess. Like I said, thick, muddy, and wet. Almost like quicksand, wet, sticky mud down there. Now, the whole time that we had hunted this area, we had stayed on that rise that was nice and dry and comfortable, looking down into all this stuff. But now we had to actually go down in there. And as it turned out, it was even more of a jungle down there than I thought it was. And those bushes that I had thought were knee or waist high turned out to actually be taller than me. So we go down into there and start trying to navigate to where we thought this moose was. And like I said, she was only 130, 140 yards away. It was just tough going down in there. And James and I actually both stepped into quicksand what I call quicksand on 2 separate occasions, and we got our foot stuck in just that real slimy, sticky mud for a minute and had to pull ourselves out. Almost lost our boots, but we didn't. So we tried to go directly to that moose, but we were thwarted by a wide creek with real sticky, muddy banks. So since we couldn't go directly to her, we tried to circle around the side, and we managed to cross that stream at a more narrow spot, get around behind her, cross another stream that was more narrow, and start walking into where we thought that moose was from the complete opposite direction. Now, we initially had a hard time finding her. It's always tough descending into stuff like that where it's hard to get your bearings. She wasn't far away, but it's still pretty challenging to find her where everything looks different like that, and the brush is just so darn tall that you can't really see. Everything looks the same. Luckily, I marked the spot she went down in Onyx from where I shot using the new Leupold RX5000 rangefinder. Now, Tim Lesser and I talked about this new rangefinder in episode 313. Basically, this rangefinder syncs with Onyx on your phone via Bluetooth, and it combines your location, the direction you are pointing the rangefinder, and the range you obtain to whatever spot you're ranging to come up with a latitude and longitude for the spot you are ranging with the rangefinder. So I sat before we moved to go down to retrieve her. I sat where I'd been shooting from, lazed the spot with my rangefinder where I last saw her, marked that spot on Onyx. And then we gradually fought our way through the willows to get to that spot. Once we were in that location, Doug looked up, and there the moose was, about 5 yards away from us. Now, we would probably, I'm sure actually, we would have eventually found her if I had not done that. It just would have taken longer, because where everyone's instinct was to walk towards once we got down into the willows turned out to actually be over 100 yards away from where I had marked her spot and where she actually was. So I'm pretty darn happy with how that rangefinder performed. And it looked like it performed exactly as advertised, very close to where she actually was. So we got to her, we took some pictures, and then we started butchering that moose and hauled her out of there. And it was definitely nice to have some help here. I could have done it all on my own, but it was much faster and much less work with lots of help like that. Now, in the process of butchering this moose, I opened up her body cavity and we conducted a detailed necropsy and checked out what those bullets did to her. First shot hit her on the right front shoulder. Second shot was also on the right shoulder, and it hit within about 2 inches of my first shot. Due to the angles, though, the first shot hit the center of the right lung and the rear of the left lung. The second shot also hit near the center of the right lung, but it hit the front of the left lung on the way out, and both shots exited her body cavity. I'm not going to share those pictures or the video I took through my scope of the hunt with the general public, but I have shared that stuff with my Patreon supporters. The video turned out great, and the pictures and commentary combined with the video do a good job of explaining the detailed performance of those terminal ascent bullets on the moose. And I also talk about some other interesting aspects about this part of the hunt there as well. So go to patreon.com/biggamehunter or click the link in the show notes. Start supporting me there if you're not doing so already to check out all of that stuff. But anyway, we spent a while in there butchering her, hauling her out, finally got everything out of the willows and back to camp. I shot the moose at 7:41 a.m. The first timestamp on a photo that we actually took with the moose on my phone was at 8:30. And then we had everything and every body back to the truck about 11:30 a.m. that morning. We drove the meat into town, dropped it off with the butcher there. They'll eventually ship it to me. Then I drove the moose head to a Colorado Parks and Wildlife office to have them check it out. Hunters are legally required to bring every single moose that they kill to a Colorado Parks and Wildlife office. They take a tooth out of it, check out the overall condition of the moose. They'll do a CWD test on it if you'd like, all that sort of stuff. So I had to do that, but I did that afternoon, and we were all set. Now, I did bring a small Yeti cooler with me to bring some of the meat home in. I just brought it actually as a carry-on bag on the plane. So I saved the heart, the tenderloins, and one backstrap from the moose. I froze all of that stuff in camp in one of the outfitter's chest freezers. Then I put all that stuff in my little cooler and brought it on the plane with me as a carry-on the next day. So I actually have a little bit of the meat here in Texas already. The rest of it is at the butcher, and I'll get it whenever they're done with it. Now, since this was a cow moose, obviously I did not get any experience traveling with a head or antlers on the airplane home, so I can't speak to any of that. But bringing that meat back was very straightforward. This wasn't a very big cooler, and I also needed to keep the whole thing under 50 pounds, both to abide by the airline rules and also just to make it practical for me to carry, because remember, James had a checked bag, I had a checked bag, plus my rifle case and our backpacks and all of that stuff. And so there was a limit to what I could have feasibly taken on the airplane with me, and the tenderloins, the heart, and the one backstrap was right at that limit. I didn't have space in the cooler or a weight allowance remaining to take that other backstrap, even though I wish I would have. But that whole process was seamless. It was frozen solid when I picked it up out of the freezer that morning, and it was still frozen solid when I made it home at the very end of the next day. The airline and TSA did not give me any problems at all bringing that stuff back. So that will be something I keep in mind for future trips. And I may try and do the same thing again if I take, do a deer hunt or an elk hunt or something like that where I'm having to fly to get there. Just bring whatever I can back, either as check bags or as a carry-on like that. But see, I took care of all that stuff that last afternoon there. Had dinner that night, woke up early the next morning, got my stuff from the freezer, packed all my stuff in the rental car, drove back to Denver, flew back home, and I made it home, maybe about 6 o'clock the following evening with James. We had another fantastic time together on this hunt, another great bonding experience. I'm also really proud of how well he performed. The Bergara Sierra, I think it's a great rifle. It's not as light as my Christensen Arms Ridgeline FFT, but the Sierra shoots as well, maybe better than the Ridgeline did, and it did so out of the box without any quote-unquote barrel break-in. There is more content coming on that rifle in the near future, but I'll just say that I really like it. I'm very happy with how it performed on this hunt. Now, this hunt also continued to solidify my love of the Banish backcountry suppressor. It is an absolute joy to carry. It tames recoil, makes it quieter, and it does all of that in a very compact package. It is great to be able to hear bullet impact on the animal like we did in this case, and that is, that's not limited to just the Banish backcountry. Most suppressors will let you do that, but it's nice to be able to get those benefits and have it out of such a compact package. Now, if you just want one rifle suppressor that performs well in both the sound and recoil mitigation departments, that's also lightweight, compact, Banish backcountry, the way to go. Same thing is also true with the Spartan Ascent tripod. It's not very heavy. It's great for glassing. I could mount a camera on it. I could shoot off of it. I could even unscrew the legs to use as trekking poles as necessary. It worked really well glassing and shooting, sitting down, kneeling, and standing. After my mule deer hunt last year, I got longer legs from Spartan Precision to make it a little bit taller, so I could glass and shoot off of it standing up if I need to. So it is a little bit heavier now with those longer legs, but it is perfect for everything that I want to do. If I ever go on a hunt where I really need something lightweight, I'll put those lightweight legs back on it. But in the meantime, I'll use it with the longer legs that let me do everything. I did almost all of my glassing just freehanding my binoculars on this hunt, and I had my rifle set up in the tripod ready to go, and that saved me some time and might have kept that moose from busting me on the last day because I did that. And I ended up shooting sitting down using that tripod. Worked really well for that. Once again, my ultimate firearm sling also worked great. I didn't walk dozens and dozens of miles on this hunt, but I did a good amount of walking, especially at the beginning of the hunt, and the sling worked well. That sling was also really good to have when I was navigating difficult terrain, especially trying to fight through all those willows, and when I was carrying stuff, and when I just needed both my hands free like that. Also happy with how the terminal ascent ammo worked on this hunt too. I was getting very close to the advertised velocity, good accuracy, and just devastating terminal performance on that moose. But take a look at the Patreon post I made about that to see all of the details. Also, the guys at Red Feather Guides and Outfitter did a great job. They took excellent care of us. Very happy I booked their services. Nice people, very attentive and patient with both of us, but especially James. It's not a luxury setup, but accommodations are comfortable. The food is good. And of course, there was very good hunting with them. Definitely worth what I paid them for this hunt. Be sure you mention my name if you ever decide to hunt with them in the future. Now, follow me on Instagram at @thebiggamehunter_. If you're not already doing so, there is a photo of my moose there. And like I said, also check out that Patreon post to see the video and all of the photos of what that bullet did. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you sign up for my email list. To do that, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up for my free ebook on the best hunting calibers. You'll get that ebook when you do that, plus you'll also start to receive the emails I send out every weekday. If you like the podcast, especially episodes like this, you'll love those emails. So make sure you're getting them too by going to huntingguns101.com. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to the BigGameHuntingBlog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.